Hello, I'm John Cooper, General Manager at Prairie Farms. We are a farmer-owned dairy cooperative. This means our company is owned by over 600 farm families who are critical members of society. We understand the dedication and care it takes to feed a family because we're all part of a family as well. This June, in celebration of National Dairy Month, we are proud to partner with our friends at Feeding South Dakota to help ensure everyone can enjoy the wholesome goodness dairy brings to the table. Here's how you can help. When you donate to Feeding South Dakota this month, Prairie Farms will match your gift, doubling the impact for families who need it most. Fighting food insecurity is of the utmost importance to both Feeding South Dakota and Prairie Farms. Together, with your help, we can make a meaningful difference to ensure everyone has access to the essential vitamins and nutrients that real dairy provides. Visit feedingsouthdakota.org/dairy to learn more and give today. From everyone at Prairie Farms and Feeding South Dakota, thank you.
My father-in-law grew up coming out of the Great Depression and ate large sandwiches. He talked about how that was lunch, was large sandwiches. And he said, and gosh, sometimes I still crave a large sandwich, right? And so those times were, people didn't have money. People were doing the best they could. They weren't buying meat at the grocery store to put in a lunch sandwich. But that food had some sort of emotional connection for him in a way that he still craved it years after he didn't need to eat that way, right? And so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's, sitting down at a table with your entire family and knowing that you share a family meal every week or every night of the week even. It could just be, having cereal in the morning with your brother and sister while you're watching cartoons. It could be your school lunch, maybe the only great meal a child gets in a day, but they're sharing it with their friends. And I think that we say, especially around the holidays, food brings us together, and it's very true. And being able to just provide that for people is a great privilege, I think, beyond that just being that fundamental need. Welcome to this week's episode of 50 Faces of Feeding South Dakota. We've had great discussions so far and conversations. I hope you've been able to tune in. But today we're in Rapid City, and we are talking with the John T. Vucurevich Foundation. I have some really great topics to cover, but let's start. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
My name is Jackie Dietrich. I'm currently serving as the president and CEO of the John T. Vucurevich Foundation. We're based right here in Rapid City. I'm a native South Dakotan. I'm fifth generation. I grew up in a family of small business owners and educators. Went away to Colorado for about 15 years and moved back right before the pandemic started. And so I've been in my role for just 6 months after having been in the nonprofit world for about the 5 years previous to moving back here. So I'm excited to be in a new position here with the foundation, but was also involved as a past grant recipient.
Okay.
So it's been a relationship in the making for some time now.
So you understood the foundation mission and goals long before you were leading the foundation.
And what it's like to write a grant application and do the report and call the grant director and say,
which can be
Jessica,
so nerve-wracking.
Help me.
And I think for many nonprofits, that is a nerve-wracking process because you don't know, maybe you're not the best writer, but you're the only person in that nonprofit, and so you have to do the writing. So this is kind of nice to have that first-hand experience and know what people are going through.
I have to say it's one of the reasons I fell in love with the foundation. It was such a different experience from having worked with other funders that don't understand what it's like to live in the nonprofit world, and having the grace of, we don't expect a perfect application on the first pass with no typos. And our team sits down and works with a nonprofit to really dig in. And as Jessica, our grant director, would say, put the best foot forward.
Yeah.
That's what we think of that as being our job, is to, support in whatever way we can. And we know that not every nonprofit in South Dakota will have, or in our region will have, a professional grant writer on staff. So we don't expect that. We don't set our standards that way. So I knew right away that this foundation does things a little bit differently.
So I do hear a lot of people, okay, I'm going to say a lot, and I can't quantify it, but people talk about, I grew up here, and then I moved away, and I came back. What was your driving force for coming back to South Dakota?
The rubber band effect.
Uh-huh.
It was hard. leaving, honestly. But for us, it was making a decision as a family about how do we pursue career opportunities that we felt like were the best thing for our family.
Yeah.
And that we learned a lot by going other places and seeing how the world works in other places and how to build a network in another place. And once our children moved out and we looked around and realized that we didn't really want to buy a $2 million home in Colorado, that we could do something very different and be back home. And honestly, moving back right before COVID couldn't have worked out any better. I mean, we were 5 minutes from a hiking trail where we could feel like we could get away. And it was just that recognition of like, we love it here and it's a different kind of value set.
It's home.
But also an opportunity to bring skill sets that we know that the community might really need. And it is home. Our kids always wanted to come back. So after we decided to move home, we thought they would stay in Colorado. They moved back too.
There you go.
It's great.
You just brought a bunch more population with you.
And we're not the only ones.
Yeah,
I mean, we have friends that are anywhere from their, early 30s to, I won't say how old I am, but they're looking at it the same way. They moved away and they want to raise their families here.
Yeah.
So.
And I have a couple of classmates that are the same way too. They go out and get that experience, but ultimately they want to raise their kids in the Midwest. They want to raise their kids how they grew up. And there is value in understanding the rural nature of our state and the neighborliness of our state. And it's one of the things that benefits us as a nonprofit in South Dakota so well, because neighbors take care of neighbors. And that really is the attitude of South Dakotans. And there's, a lot of work happening in the nonprofit space, but I think of Feeding South Dakota, the fundamental need of food, but that also comes along with the necessity for mental wellness care and, physical health care and education opportunity for people to be able to truly thrive and become, self-sustaining and change their situation. And that all comes because we are supported by people in South Dakota who've had that privilege and just want to help their neighbors. And I think that's just a beautiful thing about our state.
This is a place where people care about community. And it's amazing how much you can get done when the currency is caring about each other. And I think that's part of what felt different. And for us coming back, it was actually not raising our kids here. It was being close to aging parents. They would not be excited to hear me say that on a podcast. But
you just couldn't be away from your parents any longer.
Yeah, that's it.
Let's go with that.
That's it. But it is being rooted in the kind of community that we want to build and that we're constantly doing that, whether it's in our professional lives or our lives as parents or as friends and neighbors.
Midwest nice.
There's something to that, but it's more
is.
than that.
There is. I know
more than
people
that.
who have moved here from the East Coast and made friends through work or whatever. And then when they moved to another house, everybody was like, how can we help you move? What can we do? And they thought it was so strange because on the East Coast, they just hire a moving company. You don't have your neighbors come and help you move. And it was a completely different culture, which I've been here my whole life. I wouldn't have thought twice about it, right? But when you hear people say that's not how they do it other places, you realize how fortunate you are to be in this culture.
And we need that. We need everyone to participate and understand that every individual in this community has a role to play.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue into talking about the foundation. So tell us a little bit about the John T. Vucurevich Foundation. How did it get started? What are your goals and your purpose, your funding priorities?
Well, the mission of the foundation really comes and is rooted in our namesake. John T. Vucurevich is absolutely the face of our organization. And if I could emulate what a 50 faces of Feeding South Dakota would look like, it would be John's.
It would
and
be
not
that
mine.
one right there.
Like our entire job as a foundation is to really uphold his intent as a philanthropist. So John was born in Yugoslavia in 1912 and moved here as a very young person with his family. And very early in life, lost his father. So he had a single mother raising a group of children. Here they had landed in Lead because of Homestake.
Okay.
And so that was home for him. And he started his working life as a young man and knew what it was like to, as a teenager, have to go to work to be able to feed your family.
Your family, yep.
And that really shaped the rest of his life. He is... from my background, we would call them entrepreneurs of necessity.
Okay.
Right? You go and you start the business that builds the job that you need. And so he eventually found his way into entrepreneurship. and actually started a grocery store, was his first business here in Rapid City.
Okay.
And had a lot of trials and tribulations, and had a banking relationship with a banker who believed in him but would cover his overdraft fees.
Okay. Well, that's a great banker.
So they
how many of those
established
we
this
have today.
relationship. I know, but this is
Yeah.
how South Dakota works,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So
And probably there was a necessity for the grocery, like
Absolutely.
that banker wanted to see that grocery store be successful
community
for the
needed it.
community. Mm-hmm.
So eventually, John found his way into becoming a banker and bought a bank in Hill City. And
So
then
went from working as a teenager to owning a grocery store, and now we're a banker. Okay, all right.
Yep,
Varied
it's
experience.
just these moments that you don't understand are shaping your
Yeah.
future. That his life is very much that journey of an immigrant doing something amazing and building community here in Rapid City. He started a bank, Rushmore State Bank, and then just became a rural bank owner and amassed wealth that when he passed away in 2005, laid out an opportunity for that money to be endowed to create a foundation that would carry on and continue on in his philanthropic interests. So for John, the very core of what we do is always thinking about, like, what does a single mother need for her family to thrive? And if we can solve for that individual, we can usually find solutions that work for a broader community as well. And that is the vision, is helping the community, bringing resources to help families improve their lives and to thrive one family at a time is how we think about it.
Yeah.
And that really has become our mission today. And the vision is, how do we make Rapid City and the surrounding area a brighter place? That was what John would say, make our corner of the world a brighter place. So our board, we have 5 board members, and our staff that do our grant making work. The pillars cover exactly what we think those families need most to be able to improve their lives economically, socially, whatever that looks like. For that individual family, they have to have affordable housing, economic mobility and opportunities, early learning, and really focusing on those early years is really important. And then we think about a 4th area, which we call our basic needs, and that's where food fits in, is just what are all the support systems that fit into someone being able to access all of those other, critical supports in our community. And the nonprofits are the absolute backbone.
Yeah, I was in the warehouse earlier today, and we receive a lot of, we call it retail rescue.
Yes.
So our team goes around town, great donors that bring in items. And some of the items we receive are baby items, so diapers, formula, wipes, baby food. And that's not stuff that goes out into our Feeding South Dakota, like our mobile distribution. We have agency partners, and particularly here in Rapid City, VOA has Mommy's Closet.
Yes.
And a lot of that goes
of our
there.
programs.
And to your point, those are things that we have to start to think of when we think about those single moms and those kids, that if they're not able to put food on the table, there's likely more needs that they have. And the food is the first thing you think of, right? And parents will skip meals in order to make sure that their kids get fed. Yep. But I just think about, what if I wouldn't have been able to diaper my kids or, have those things? How different would life have been? And so that, while I can see food fits into that basic needs, there's a lot of things that fit into that bucket. I mean, it's more than just food. It's all the things, right? It's the things that help you not worry so that the next thing can be important to you.
And that's the key for us, for how we think about what grant making is important. It often isn't just the funding that matters. It's thinking about it holistically as a system. If we're trying to think about, how do we just ensure that a family has an opportunity to increase their wage and to work to support their families, it's all those pieces of what you don't want them worrying about, which is, if I'm going to enroll in a program, which we're often funding a scholarship, for example, for attainment, then we can't have that person worrying about and trying to figure out where the next meal comes from, or sacrificing going to school that night because they need to work to afford diapers. So that's how we think about our grant making. It's okay, we'll put money towards a scholarship program, but we know it's an entire system that has to support that opportunity. And if we don't do that, then we're not really having the impact that we intend to have.
And you and I talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but even Feeding South Dakota, What we know is how to distribute food. And we know how to get food into the state. We know how to get food into every county, to our partners and through our programs, to the people who need it the most. I mean, that's our expertise, right? But when we have people like SDSU Extension that can come alongside and provide learning opportunities that we can give with that food, or we have, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, other things, which I'm not doing really good at, but that's that whole collaboration and that whole importance of coming together with everybody's area of expertise to help support that family or that individual so that they can have everything they need to thrive.
So as a funder, when our foundation was created, it was, of course, with grant making as the core of what we do. But as a private foundation, so we were established in 2007. That's when our first formal grant making process started. We've done $110 million now in grant making. And
that's incredible.
So we look at specifically the Rapid City area. So we think of like, what does Rapid City need? And then what's within that ecosystem? So it might be a daycare center in Spearfish, but that's because it's directly related to everything else that we're trying to do for, for our kind of core community. And within that $110 million, what most people aren't aware of is that it just isn't grant making. We also are conveners. So when there are issues, one thing that comes to immediately to mind, because we have a network that's meeting tomorrow morning called Systems of Care, but it was bringing together a whole group of nonprofit leaders who were thinking about how do we provide better youth services in the community. And as a foundation, by being able to hold space for that conversation, provide the coffee, ensure that those conversations had a space in the community, they were able to identify specific solutions. And it's usually not our agenda. Right? We're not a funder who's going out there and saying, this is what the community needs.
Come tell us.
Bring us your ideas. It's listening to what the ideas that already exist, to the innovation that's already on top of these leaders' minds, and then our role as the foundation is thinking about, okay, how can we help? What resources can we bring to the table? And sometimes it's funding. Other times it's giving an opportunity for the minds to come together and think about what solutions look like. It's understanding when we, go through a grant application process, we talk about what partnerships do you have? How are you working with others in the community to ensure that this has impact and will be long lasting? And we consider that to be a major point on the evaluation scale when we look at an application. It's like, if you're acting on your own, we know this.
Because how do you know it's the right thing when you're doing it on your own as well?
And I mean, there aren't enough resources to go around. We have to operate that way in this community.
It has to be done together.
It does.
And we through the podcast we've talked about so many things. We've talked about the evolution of the work that the food bank does, and we've talked about moving from a food pantry in Sioux Falls and a food bank in Rapid City to become one statewide hunger relief organization, and the evolution of not just getting food out, but the programs and the partnerships and all the different ways. But what it all comes back to through that entire evolution of work is community. And from the very beginning, the work of Feeding South Dakota has been about community. It's been about getting food into communities so that people have what they need. It's been about working with communities to do as much as we can with the resources that we have. And foundations like Vucurevich are so important to that, because you kind of have this like eagle-eye view of those communities, because you're seeing all these different grant applications come in, and you're thinking, well, they're doing this over here and they're doing this over here, and you can kind of start to puzzle that together and see how
that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it's so important to communities. Like, communities need many things, and back to the point of the grocery store. Even now in rural communities, when a grocery store leaves, food insecurity rates rise because they lost access, their best access to food, right?
Absolutely.
So people who weren't food insecure before maybe are now, because they may drive but not 40 miles to the next grocery store. And so what are their options, right? And that's when that community now has a community-wide issue that has to be resolved. And there's only so many places you can look for that help.
And that's where the role of a foundation or philanthropy to think about how we convene, and it's often recognizing that the community knows what solution they need. And I think that's what interests us about Feeding South Dakota is we've both evolved in that parallel universe is recognizing that our role can be supporting the ideas that the community has for what that solution should look like for them. I mean, I've heard Lori, your CEO, talk about, that the community often knows what the best solution is for feeding a senior or for making sure there's a backpack program. That if you came in with your approach to how it should happen, it probably wouldn't be successful long term.
Yeah, and in many communities, that's the current state, right? The mobile food distribution program came out of a necessity during COVID, right? Our food pantries were closing, restaurants weren't open, but people needed to be fed. And so we showed up and we brought food. And while that was effective and efficient at that time, it's still efficient, but maybe it's not the most effective because that community has changed since COVID. And it's important that we're listening to that community and we're understanding what they need. So if our truck is there 1 hour a month, but we could reallocate that food to a pantry partner or a backpack program, and that's more access, that's a better way to do the work than to just think that we're going to show up and tell them how it is, right? Because every community is different.
And that's the reality is we're not doing it right if we're not responding to the moment in time of what's needed, but also thinking about what strengthens the system.
Yeah.
And that's my love for this work is this is an opportunity to work with systems thinkers. Or if they're not thinking about the system, then it's an opportunity to connect them to the partners who are and help them to see their role in changing a system or improving, strengthening a system. And I think that's the values alignment for our foundation with organizations like Feeding South Dakota is like it's the constant adjustment of how we're approaching it, how we're thinking about the community, and it all starts with listening and understanding that sometimes the voices that most need to be heard are the ones who are just showing up and making sure that their neighbor has access to food or gets a ride to the grocery store.
So well into the conversation I had with Jeannie in that with the backpack program in Rapid City.
Yes.
I mean, she knew that a solution needed to be found. And she saw an idea on national media, and she brought it to Feeding South Dakota. And it got started. The momentum got started, and now that backpack program is across the state. And so she knew what her community needed. She knew who to go to get that work going.
Right.
Fundraised for 2 years to get that program going. And really is, I said to her, like, I don't think you have enough recognition. Like, you're like the seed of the backpack program.
Right.
And it's now this beautiful, flourishing, thriving plant, but you started that seed. And maybe at some point something would have come along, but I think it's pretty incredible to reflect on that, and she should totally pat herself on the back.
I have to say, I don't think our nonprofit professionals get enough credit for the incredible both resilience, but also the ingenuity. And for me, I spent 20 years working with entrepreneurs, whether they were the entrepreneurs of necessity that we talked about before, like the small business owners who are starting the corner store because there isn't one in their 5-mile radius of their neighborhood, or those who are in university and are thinking about how they do this as a career, which is a whole nother conversation. But there's so much in common with how our nonprofit community works is that constant entrepreneurship and how they approach and how they think about those that they serve and then try to bring their solutions to actually meet a need. And I think that's what John loved so much and why he spent so much time talking to the nonprofit leaders. The executive director of the United Way, John would just show up at her office door and
what's going on?
Check in.
Yeah.
Tell me what's going on.
Yeah. That's great. And that's great. And I would say that one of the things I feel we really feel confident saying, is that unless you've needed the service of a nonprofit organization, you don't really understand it. And so John, having grown up in a single mom household, likely needed support from their neighbors and their community. He understood the importance of that nonprofit work. And there are many people that haven't had to rely on services like that don't understand the amount of work and ingenuity and stretching of resources and the absolute need for it until you've needed it.
I have to say, Stacey, I have yet to meet a single South Dakotan who hasn't benefited from the work of a nonprofit. Can you think of one?
Interesting.
I would love to meet one if you know any.
Interesting.
I mean, even our arts community or
Yeah.
your church,
Fair.
if the faith-based
Yeah.
community.
That's fair.
The nonprofits are our community's infrastructure.
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere, and we all benefit from the work
Yeah.
that they're doing. Sometimes they just do it so quietly and so elegantly that we don't even know how
Yeah.
much they impact our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Childcare. I mean, they're the ones who are thinking about these big problems,
Yes.
these big issues.
Yes, because that childcare, like housing, like food, is like a ripple effect, right? I mean, if a family has 2 working people and the childcare becomes too expensive, if one parent stays home, says, "Well, I'm not going to work because we can't afford childcare," they've just now lost revenue into their family, and that's not necessarily the benefit because they've lost more than the childcare would have cost. And
Yep.
that's, I think, a lot of the epidemic. And then now the community lost people in their workforce. And that makes it harder for businesses to run. And, sort of those kind of when you make a decision, it's hard to think of every aspect, but you can start to see the impact and the trends almost immediately, whether this is going to be a positive or a negative thing. But it's so hard to backpedal on some of those things like housing and childcare.
Yes.
So that's where the think tank, I'm going to call it a think tank, but the convening,
The brain
bringing people
trust.
together, the
Yes,
brain
the
trust.
brain
I like
trust.
that. I like that. That's where that's so important, really.
It is, and that's, I mean, the perfect example is the systems of care group that I referred to earlier. So that's where these solutions are really coming from, is sitting around the table and saying, "Are you having a problem with this? This is how we are addressing it. What could we do together?" And it's surprising how quickly, even though it can be a patient process, but how quickly things can get done or piloted, or if you know the right funders, and if we can bring more funders into the mix, you can seed those ideas. And again, it's just those are the things that help our community to become stronger and more equitable and the brighter place, the brighter corner of the world that John envisioned. That's what it's all about.
I can tell you have a heart for this. So I can only imagine that granting decisions are difficult.
Oh, gosh. I wish we had so much more money.
Right? Yeah, I imagine, because there's just has to be so much coming at you and so many thoughts and opportunities, and being able to fund it all isn't a reality, but it's got to be difficult.
We wish we could do everything. I don't know a funder who probably wouldn't say that when they work in a place-based community like we do. Like making the community's dreams come true is our favorite thing. If we could wave our magic wand, it would be to fund everything. I think, though, what we also feel like we have a North Star around who we're trying to serve. And if we can stay focused on that one family, and like our dream is that if a participant comes into one of our programs, that they benefit from everything we fund. That they might have an opportunity to go to school, an opportunity to get an apartment, an opportunity to, the childcare program that we support, that their employer might participate in that.
Yeah.
We love the idea that one person can find everything that they need to get, to reach their goal for what their own thriving family looks like.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about your partnership with Feeding South Dakota, because I know you've got some fun stories. How did the partnership with Feeding South Dakota start? Do you know, like, how long has it been happening? What's been going on over the time of the partnership?
I think we go back at least 30 years.
That's pretty cool.
Maybe more than that.
That's pretty cool.
And there were a lot of potatoes in the mix.
Yeah.
So there were programs that really were just trying to meet emergency food needs, and we were trucking, literally, trucks of potatoes across the state.
So for the 50th anniversary, we tried to get into the archives as best as we could, and we have a great shot, like a picture from a newspaper article of the Rapid City potato giveaway, where there's a whole line of cars, and everybody got like 100 pounds of potatoes at the giveaway in the trunk of their car. And 100 pounds of potatoes. But potatoes can do a lot of things. I mean, and they store pretty well, and they, they're less perishable than other vegetables and fruits. And I bet that was, hey, this was great in Rapid City. Let's keep this going and start trucking potatoes everywhere.
Personal aside, I love this story because I grew up with a
I think
single
it's
mom
great.
who made potato soup twice a week.
Love
and
it.
That was her thing.
But it was important, right? I mean, it was
We
today-
wouldn't have had dinner some nights if we wouldn't have had potato soup.
Exactly.
In our household.
Exactly. So we laugh because today our distributions look a lot different and more varied food. So it's kind of fun to giggle at it. But at that time, clearly the need was there because of the line of cars.
But this is often how it goes for what we see and what we fund. And we, there are certain areas where we know we will be a long-term funder because it's a long-term solution and it's a patient capital kind of process. It all starts somewhere. You have to start somewhere. And if it starts with potatoes but turns into mobile distribution where there's selection, and I know you do the beef and dairy programs and that we're rounding that out, and that's part of the evolution of building programs where you learn as you go, you gain understanding of what works, you gain capacity, talent. All of that is part of the process. And sometimes even today we'll start with programs that are just trying to do really simple things.
Right. You
Diapers,
got to start somewhere.
potatoes, but the importance of that work, we know what that can lead to. And we got to start somewhere.
Because you've seen it.
We've seen it.
You've seen it go further and further. And that is the nonprofit mentality of how can we do more?
Always.
I mean, I say that Feeding South Dakota, we know how to distribute food, but we do so much more. I mean, because it's like, okay, we're doing this really well. Now what else can we do? What else can we, help with or connect with to do more and do bigger? Because you just are always driven to want to end that line at your programs. You don't want it to exist. And I don't know that will ever be a real thing. Ending hunger in South Dakota is a very lofty goal or mission for us to have. And but it'd be great if it went down a little bit at least, if we could, that food insecurity rate, Lori and I joke, we've been here about 3.5, 4 years, and the food insecurity rate has gone up every year. We're like, we promise we're doing work here. So that gets a little disheartening because you're just kind of spinning your wheels and you're doing more and more. But it really is about just stretching and stretching as much as you can.
I think the flip side of that is organizations like ours have a responsibility for thinking about how we increase resources for these solutions to have a bigger impact. And I mean, we sit in the same boat. Ours is we want zero poverty in our community.
Wouldn't that be great?
We would put ourselves out of a job. We would spend
Right?
every dollar we
How
had.
many people say that? I do. I mean, I'd love to say that this work isn't needed.
But there's something that I think first we get better at measuring what we're doing. So while the problem seems bigger, sometimes it's just because we get better at actually measuring what matters.
Yep. Eat the elephant one bite at a time.
I don't like vanity metrics. It's like we get past that and looking at what the actual root causes are. Sometimes it does make the problem seem bigger, even though the solutions have a bigger investment is happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And ours is the same way. It's like the more we learn, the more opportunities for funding we identify. And so it's almost a curse of our success, right? It's like the better we get at being able to see what's really going on, the more opportunities we see where a solution is needed or could be funded. And so it's, again, I feel like our organizations are very similar in some of this journey. It's partially that. It's that idea that the better you get at developing capacity for building local leaders to support hunger in their community, that then you become more and more responsible for those opportunities to come to fruition. And I think that is what's happening is it's the more success we have as organizations at fulfilling our mission, the further we get, the more responsibility we take. The more we see what's needed and how we can be a part of that. And we wouldn't be in this work if we weren't the kind of people who just stood up and wanted to do something about it.
Right. But you make a really important point, because it's when we have that realization, an additional part of our responsibility is to let others know. And I remember when I first started, we had a drop in food, and food was going out the door as fast as it was coming in. So this was right after COVID. we had this great influx of food, and then that changed, right?
Yeah.
But the need was still high. And I remember reaching out to media to say, hey, we have a call to action over here. We need food. And we need to reach out to, communities to let them know that. And I remember one reporter emailing me back and saying, wow, we're on our way. Like, Feeding South Dakota, like, you don't often ask for help, so we know this is a big deal. And that's where that responsibility lies, is not just keeping it to ourselves and trying to continue to do the work, but letting others know this is the reality of the situation.
Right.
This is, the prices are up at grocery stores. Well, they're up for us too. And, it's just so important that we continue to amplify that message and tell that story, because the impact of how people support us and getting food to people is important. And I know that's ultimately what people want to hear. But first, you have to understand the situation and understand that story that we tell about the one student who only had a jar of peanut butter in the fridge and was able to get food because of the backpack program. He's not the only kid that's that way. There's so many more kids, and here's how we know that. And here's why we know that, because this is the situation. And that is a huge responsibility, I think, of this work.
Feeding South Dakota is very lucky to have you.
I didn't
agree
say it for that reason.
I agree 100% though with that. The importance of just communicating what we learn and how we see what's going on, because sometimes we're really the front line.
Yeah.
Our nonprofits are the front line of being able to see what's really happening in lives, and that this is touching the lives of real people.
And people who aren't likely to amplify that themselves.
Or sometimes don't have the connections or
Or
the
don't wanna draw
avenue. They all have
attention to it.
voices. They're often just not invited into the spaces that where they most need to be heard, right? So as a foundation, that's a direction that we're also going, is recognizing that, so as a foundation, legally, this is where it gets technical. We have an endowment.
Here's the boring stuff.
We have an endowment that John established. From that, it provides the funding that we do grant making with every year.
Yep.
The IRS allows us to do grant making, but in addition to that, what we call direct charitable activities, which is the work that supports the grant making. So it allows us to do the advocacy work. And of course, what we're seeing right now is, like, it's not easy as a nonprofit to stand up alone in a room and say, here's an issue, here's how it's affecting our organization, how are you going to help us? So we're recognizing as a foundation that that's an opportunity for us to bring additional support into the mix. It's like it can go beyond grant making to help tell those stories. So we're right now a team of 4.
Great, big, mighty team.
Largely focused on
You're probably doing
grant making.
amazing things for a team of 4.
But we have also a communications function. Crystal is our communications lead, who comes from the grant making world, so she understands the nonprofit life very, very well. But then are also expanding our team to include someone who's just focused on that data and reporting, and how do we understand the issues and be able to help our community understand what's really going on.
Right.
And we take that responsibility seriously as a foundation, and so we're investing in that over the coming year to really build up our muscle around how we can help nonprofits have more of a platform, whether it's your individual story as a nonprofit or your area, your issue area, that we can help to really bring some heft around, like, the research and the data.
That's really important, because when a nonprofit has a stressor, the community has a stressor. And I think of Feeding South Dakota, we are privately funded. I mean, we receive USDA food items, and we partner with state agencies in order to deliver on those programs. But other than that, we are privately funded. And when these gaps start to widen, we need our communities to step in, to your point where you said, here's what's going on, how can you help us? Because the work is so important. And if we can't fill that gap, if we can't meet the needs that we've been meeting, if we have to step back when things are not decreasing on their own, then that community is going to feel that stress.
Yep.
And it's just such a precarious balance of wanting success and health and ability within communities, and knowing we're such an important part of that picture, that if we don't raise our voice in advocacy, if we don't let people know it takes everybody working together, the donors, the volunteers, the policymakers, the elected officials, the people who have powerful voices. If we don't work together, we're not going to be as successful. And so it's a really good thing to lean into in that aspect, because we're fortunate as a nonprofit to be large enough to gather data and tell that story, but not every nonprofit has that opportunity.
That's right. And I think it takes a lot of courage to invite in those who don't necessarily readily see that we all have shared values and we all want the same thing
Yes.
at the end.
Right.
To kind of get past that initial barrier of what that feels like and how you build those trusted relationships. And sometimes a nonprofit just needs trusted messengers. Like, it doesn't need to always be the executive director or the communications professional who's trying to get that message out. That's something that community members can do to help.
Yes,
Is
absolutely.
help us share your message. Help us, it's sitting down with someone for a cup of coffee and just saying, this is something I care about. What do you think? Would you be interested in learning more with me?
Yeah. Or even, in our situation, people with lived experience with hunger, it can be a very private thing. But if you share your story privately with a lawmaker or a policymaker as a choice to do that, that's way more impactful than me giving stats or data to them. I mean, that is impactful to help people understand, but those true stories, elevating those voices is really what it comes down to. And I think, this month we're talking about child hunger, and I think this kind of wraps back around into that, where those are the voiceless people that we need to really raise our voices for, right?
Well, the thing is they have voices.
They do, but
But
yes,
we can help
amplify it.
the right audience to hear them. We
Right.
can amplify. We can help to open the doors that we can unlock. You know,
Right,
And
yeah.
that's something that we can. Your organization too, of like when you're a recognized leader in the community. That's a gift that we can bring to the community, is being able to hear from others and doing work that's informed by those voices. Like, we work at the Circle here in Rapid City, and they actually have a youth advisory board.
Yep.
And everything they do is
Yes.
informed by what their particular client base
Is saying.
believes is needed, and they let them lead. And that's, again, it's like those are where the best,
Yes.
most sustainable, effective solutions come to the forefront.
And right back into community, knowing
Right
best.
back into community.
Yep. So funding potatoes to mobile distributions and backpack program is a big program that Vucurevich Foundation supports. And I had planned to just say, tell me why. Why is that important to you? But you started off with it, with saying, how John Vucurevich was from a single family, and that absolutely aligns and makes sense, right? That is thinking about that family unit, especially those single moms and those kids that are more likely to be food insecure and more likely to need the support of food access.
Well, that's our basic needs pillar as an organization, is like recognizing that if we can't help to fund food needs in our community, we might as well not have a scholarship program, because that mother's going to spend her energy, her creativity, figuring out how to feed her family instead of how to go to school and have the best possible career trajectory, right? And that's just one example. It's, if you have affordable housing, but you're not putting food on the table, the likelihood that you're going to be able to sustain that housing solution, it's just, that's where vulnerability comes from.
Yep.
And I think that for us, it's like food is just, it's not just that it's a basic need, even though that's the funding category. We also care about social belonging. We also care about families feeling connected and having dignity. And, when you think about food, it's like that one recipe that your grandmother never wrote down, or like your favorite holiday memory. Every single one of mine is connected to food. I don't know about you. And so when we think about just what does make our community brighter,
right,
as was John's intent, food is an obvious pillar within the basic needs category, right?
And it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic status is. So I had a conversation recently with someone that my father-in-law grew up coming out of the Great Depression and ate large sandwiches. He talked about how that was lunch, was large sandwiches. And he said, and gosh, sometimes I still crave a large sandwich, right? And so those times were, people didn't have money. People were doing the best they could. They weren't buying meat at the grocery store to put in a lunch sandwich. But that food had some sort of emotional connection for him in a way that he still craved it years after he
Yeah.
didn't need to eat that way, right? And so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's, sitting down at a table with your entire family and knowing that you share a family meal every week or every night of the week even. It could just be, having cereal in the morning with your brother and sister while you're watching cartoons. It could be, your school lunch, maybe the only great meal a child gets in a day, but they're sharing it with their friends. And I think that we say, especially around the holidays, food brings us together, and it's very true. And being able to just provide that for people is a great privilege, I think, beyond that just being that fundamental need.
Absolutely. I think the role that food plays in our daily lives, it's also about choice and about autonomy. And I don't know a single person who benefits from these programs that wouldn't choose differently if they could, right? But we all have circumstances in our lives that inform the choices that we can make, and that's reality.
Yeah.
And if we can bring more choice that in one area, that often leads to better outcomes in another. And as a funding organization, we think of that as catalytic philanthropy. That is what philanthropy does when it's at its best, is thinking about what's the entire system of support that we can bring to ensure that someone has their best chance at life.
Yeah.
And that in Rapid City, we, and in our area, we can define that. We can decide as a community what that looks like and how we want to show up. And I think that's what's so special about organizations like yours that bring both a system and have trucks and have freezers and have mechanisms, but also have volunteer opportunities and ways for community to get involved and to be a part of like a scheduled way of showing up in the community and knowing that when you show up, it counts.
Yeah. And it bolsters us to know that so many people want to be involved in the movement. And if financial involvement isn't a way you can be involved, there's this volunteer opportunity. And it's so meaningful. Volunteers come back again and again and again. And we even have young volunteers who come in, kids in the summer when they're out of school or on holiday breaks, 12, 13, 14 years old that come back every week. And because they know the importance of the work and they're learning about the importance of the work. And that's just incredible.
Yeah, to your point, it's not always just, what we invite others to be a part of this work. We don't fundraise, so we don't have donors. It's one perk of this job.
Yeah, that is nice.
that I celebrate often. The other aspect, though, comes back to the communication piece that we were talking about earlier. Is volunteer is one way that if you're not donating with dollars, but also like a post on Facebook, like help to advance the message that's getting out there, share it with a friend. There's nothing I love more than when we call a legislator and say, hey, we have this concern. And they say, oh, you're the sixth one who's called today. Call, share your story specifically about how that program showed up in your life. It doesn't have to be the understanding the economic impact of X, Y, and Z. It's literally, hey, I went to that organization's performance last week and it was the highlight of my week. I really hope you continue to support it.
Or even I see the line at the Feeding South Dakota truck every month. What are those people going to do if that's not an option? Bringing it back home, driving it home and making it personal.
And that's what helps to inform policy. It helps direct where the power goes. That's the reality of how it's working, like behind the scenes. And I think sometimes we need to just be reminded that we do have a powerful voice. And though it's frustrating, it does matter. It's showing up to vote. It's all of those pieces that are very clearly very important right now. Yeah.
Well, and we could really go down a rabbit hole in this realm of policy, but I do want to acknowledge that we've had an impact from federal decisions, and we're so grateful that the John T. Vucurevich Foundation and the Black Hills Area Community Foundation offered bridge funding, and we were fortunate to be a recipient of that to help protect the food accessibility in the Rapid City and Black Hills area. And I think that is also just a really great indication of having your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the nonprofit community, because I know we're not the only ones that have needed that, but being one of the first organizations to offer that type of funding was really meaningful to us. When something like that it's like having the rug pulled out from under you. And there was no time to prep. There was no time to make alternative plans. There was no time to plead our case or to go seek funding in time to grow inventory. It just happened, and it was immediate. And that's, again, difficult for us because that we stretch our inventory, but we don't want to impact ultimately the people we're serving. And so I want to express gratitude for that, because it just really sort of sets you apart in knowing that, hey, this is an issue and we have to do something about it because our community needs it. And that has been just really a great opportunity for us here.
Well, I have to say, we appreciate all that you're doing, and we know that the demand is only going to increase. We're very fortunate to have partners like the Black Hills Area Community Foundation. I mean, as soon as January's events started to occur, we were on a hike together here in town talking about, what is this going to look like? How can we respond as quickly as possible? You talk to your board, I'll talk to mine, and we're good to go. And that's some of the brilliance as funders that can operate the way that we do. I mean, the Black Hills Area Community Foundation has donors that want to respond, and they want to show up when it counts the most. That's why they become part of a community foundation. And ours is just, we're a private foundation, so we can be as flexible and adjust as quickly as we need to when we know a response is needed. So I have to give kudos to our board too, who just said, go do it. There's no questions here about what's important.
Right.
But I think it's important for us that, as these shifts start to occur, there are others that we're, just trying to learn as much as we can and have as many conversations as we possibly can so we can understand what the impact and what the need might be. But the most important thing was that hunger didn't increase in our community as a result of those cuts or any shifts that are occurring. We put out a survey, and we had 70 organizations like yours respond and say, not all of them have seen a direct action or result yet, but they're sharing that information here's what it looks like in September or October for us. And so we're trying to map all that out and just, answer as many phone calls as we can, have as many 20-minute, 30-minute phone calls as we possibly can. And I'm just grateful for organizations like yours that have those trusted relationships with either our team or the community foundation, sometimes both, to be able to pick up the phone and say, man, this is really challenging. And they know that that's a safe conversation to have with our organizations.
Right.
That is so special. Sometimes nonprofits don't want their funders to know that it's not going so great.
Right. We want to be the
or that
A+
it's tough.
student.
Exactly. And we're not that kind of funder. Like that, we would rather you come to us when
we are
things
failing,
are hitting the fan.
Yeah, when we flunked the test, or
I don't know if it's ever
that we did
failing.
that.
It's just like sometimes things get hard and crunchy and difficult. And
they do, and that is part of the risk of having a portion of our inventory supported federally. That's a risk, right? Because that can fluctuate. And I had an intern a couple years ago who one of the deliverables she had to earn credit for her class was she had to do a SWOT analysis on the food bank.
Oh gosh.
And I remember that her greatest weakness was the federal food portion because it's unpredictable.
Yeah.
With any change of leadership in the president's office or even within the USDA, that funding could shift. And I remember looking at that and thinking, she's right,
not wrong.
But I mean, what are the chances? It's food. Oof, boy, maybe she had like a glass, what do they call those? Like a
the glass
ball or a figure eight or whatever, or the
yes.
magic 8 ball. There we go. I was gonna get there.
Our concern is like the philanthropy that we have locally will never be enough to step in. I mean, I never would have guessed in a million years, as someone who used to work in the food world, that USDA would be the first cuts that we actually saw, which just blew my mind. In an agricultural state, it's like, how is this? I was shocked.
Right, because it's not just an impact to us as the food, it's an impact to the producers.
Local producers. This is literally our bread and butter, folks. I don't know. So that was a bit surprising, not what we thought we would see. We know that we can't replace what we as taxpayers voted and created through that system. But we're also lucky to know that so many nonprofits and that philanthropy can reach areas that government cannot.
Yeah.
And that is truly, in my mind, like the value of a nonprofit is they can be in places and go places and do things in ways that are more effective than any other system or opportunity we can create.
Yeah.
So how do we balance that?
Mm-hmm.
How do we learn as much as we possibly can? How do we bring, the donor that is able to write a little bit of an extra check for the next 6 months while you all figure it out?
Yep.
And we have every confidence that that nonprofits have the ability to figure it out, but we also know that tough decisions are gonna come.
And ingenuity. I mean, back to your point.
Necessity is the mother of invention. There we go. Necessity is the mother of invention. That is a thing. I think it is times of innovation, and sometimes where the best ideas float to the top.
Back to the drawing board. Here's what we have. What can we do?
What we're thinking about next, so we were able to do the response funding, is now how do we start to gather our community leaders just to make sure that everyone has the space to talk to each other about what do we do?
Yeah. And
what are you doing? What are you doing?
Yes.
How are we figuring this out together?
Yes.
Let's go.
And how are you doing?
And how are you doing?
How are you doing? Yeah. Yeah. It's like the way a lot of conversations start these days with colleagues. Hey, it's not how is it going? It's how are you doing? Because we know how it's going. How are you doing? We're just, floating. We're doing the best. We're paddling fast. We're just trying our best. But again, all comes back to community. All comes back to just supporting each other, understanding each other, and knowing that together we're better. And having support from funders like you. And the beautiful story of how this all began is, I love it. I think it's great. It was a really good, a good way to bring things around. And what an incredible legacy that was left from somebody who started, honestly, with nothing. Right? Started in struggle and challenges and was able to rise out of that. And I hope that through the services that nonprofits are providing, we see more of that. And we see more people doing that.
To me, that's John's legacy, right? It's empowering others. It's being an enabler to the best and brightest ideas in our community. And if we can continue to commit to that and to show up as community leaders when it matters, again, that's where the magic happens.
Okay, well, this was really good discussion, but I have one question for you before we go.
Okay.
I hope nobody gave this away to you.
No.
Okay, because it's not in my list of questions.
Okay, embracing myself.
If South Dakota were a fruit or vegetable, what fruit or vegetable would it be and why?
Why do strawberries come immediately to mind?
I don't know.
I think it's
Can you make a correlation?
Maybe.
Okay.
It's not actually a fruit. No. What is it? Not actually a berry. It's a fruit. What
I should probably be up to date on the tomato. I know, is it a vegetable or a fruit? So I don't even categorize that. It just stands on its own.
Point being is the more you learn about what happens here in South Dakota, the more surprised you might be. And it's a little bit sweet and a little bit tart sometimes. I think there's so much brightness to what happens when things do ripen in our community, right? I've just been a part of so many wonderful things that when for example, a business that we started in 1999 that I thought would be just kind of a flash in the, or, you don't think it's going to be something that lasts for years. Right. And now it's transforming how agriculture is done nationally. And it's that happens in South Dakota, and it takes time to nurture, and it takes curation. It takes someone who's tending to the garden, and that's it for me.
That's the first time I think I've had strawberry.
Okay.
So I like it. But also, I've been so impressed with everybody's answers and
really?
How they correlated. That was just so great. I love it. It was so great. Well, thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it. It was really great conversation, and we maybe went down the advocacy line a little further than we should. No, I'm not further than we should have, but
that's where we need to be right now.
Try to tiptoe around it a little bit, but I appreciate
Please, people, advocate for what you care about.
Speak up,
Speak up, use your voice.
Thanks for being here today. We really appreciate it. Hey, take action, speak up, advocate. Head over to the John T. Vucurevich Foundation's website to learn more about the work that they're doing and the nonprofits they're supporting here in the Rapid City area. If you want to learn more about Feeding South Dakota, what we're advocating for, how you can support that, we do have an advocate page on our website under Ways to Give. Otherwise, we thank you for being here, and we look forward to next week's conversation. Have a great week.